You're listening to the Seen and Solved podcast brought to you by Hubbard-Hall. Better results, less chemistry.
So welcome back to this edition of Seen and Solved. Today, again, we're talking with Jeff Davis, Senior Vice President of Business Development and Distribution at Hubbard-Hall. And Jeff, one of the things I want to talk to you about was a phrase that I really hadn't heard until a couple of years ago, remanufacturing. But tell us a little bit about what that is and why is it so important for companies these days?
Thanks for having me again, Tim. I think the different thing is remanufacturing, although people may not be aware of it, has been around for a long time. The difference between just remanufacturing and restoring or just bringing something, putting a fresh coat of paint on something, the difference is it's a manufacturing process in an industrial environment where you're bringing you're taking end-of-life components and basically breaking them down to all their components and remanufacturing them, and it's usually something that's got a long time horizon, something that's like an engine block, for instance, or brake calipers, something where you can remove all the contaminants and smut and carbon from different parts and bring them down to like new quality, and then remanufacture and bring them back up to almost like new. And you'll see many times, many things, if you have to go bring your car in to have something repaired, many of those parts will be remanufactured and guaranteed same as new. So it's really interesting because in some industries, if you're looking at aerospace, you really don't talk about remanufacturing, because I don't know if you'd want to get on a plane that had remanufactured parts. So aerospace companies will do overhaul. There's also a lot of remanufacturing in automotive, aerospace, military, medical devices, what's called HDOR, heavy duty off-road equipment. Most of the components there can be remanufactured. What makes it unique is that if you look at kind of the reduce, reuse, recycle, the trinity, if you will, of that comment, there's a fourth element that we like to say remanufacturing. Because you can reuse something, but people think the ultimate is to recycle parts, take aluminum cans or any type of metal and then melt it down and remake something similar or something different. The difference with an engine block, for instance, is you don't melt that metal down and make it something else, so you don't have to put more energy into to reuse or recycle something. You just clean it up as like new and it goes back out in the field. So we see a lot of that happening. Military is pretty common. A lot of automotive and brakes and engines and transmissions and steering and you name it. There's remanufactured parts everywhere in the industry now.
Right. Besides it being a sustainable initiative, I know that just looking the other day that a lot of government procurement calls for remanufactured, right? They want, the government is trying to, the U.S. government is telling a lot of its departments to look for remanufactured when they go out and purchase. So it's a very smart business move to get into that chain. But like you said, some of these parts that you're talking about, an engine block, there may be nothing wrong with it. It's just part of an older engine that could certainly be brought out, cleaned, and then put back in to use somewhere.
Well, so I've seen industry, in automotive industry, you'll see an engine block where there may be some out of spec cylinders or something is wrong with that big engine block. And I've seen companies that do it's additive manufacturing or kind of like metallized 3D printing, if you will. They will actually rebuild the inside housing and then machine the cylinders to make them exactly the same specs as a brand new cylinder. So they're able to get quality that is pretty remarkable. And, it's such an enormous part of the U.S. economy and jobs and everything. It just becomes something that really is sustainable. And most of that keeps the product and the process in the United States, which has been really encouraging.
Right. Yeah, I read something a while back that something like 70% of anything that's been made in manufacturing involving aluminum is still in use. It's been remanufactured, and it doesn't really go to the landfill. It is reused. I'm sure some of it is, melted down or whatever it is, but it makes good business sense with that. But a lot of it, what you've already mentioned, I think some of the industries that are using this, like you said, automotive, military, aerospace, probably not to the great extent that we see. But What are some other applications you're seeing being used in the remanufacturing process?
Well, I think it can be, there's a lot more in electronics, electric vehicles, battery manufacturing, all of those things. Obviously they're trying to find ways to recycle the electrolytes or the lithium in the batteries. They also remanufacture all the housings for the electronics and anything that has some value, whether it be in the metal value or the restoration of those things, can be reused and can be remanufactured. And for us, most of that industry, they call their raw materials are your old parts. Okay, so to them, they call those the core. Those are the cores. The core they have to get back, they have to find a way to remove the contaminants and restore the core to like new quality before they can then remanufacture. So they have to clean it. They have to, provide rust prevention. And I think of an instance. We have a huge company that remanufactures brake calipers from all over the world, and they're able to bring those down. And I think they probably do 200,000 a week. And so they're getting those from all over the world. And the process that we were able to help them with was, after they break them down and remake them, they had to provide extended shelf life for when it gets into your local auto parts store. And so now they're able to get up to 2 years of shelf life on some of these parts that are being shipped around the world to the auto parts stores.
Hubbard-Hall has a lot of products that should be used or can be used in this remanufacturing, because once you look at the substrate, you look at the contamination and everything else, but you all have the cleaners, the strippers, the degreasers, the rusters. So talk about that a little bit. You guys have a lot of these products that are going into this remanufacturing system.
Yeah, so right from the start, I think a remanufacturing company will get in, thousands, truckloads of parts, for instance, and you can imagine there are all sorts of levels of breaking down or contaminated, or they look nothing like they did when they were new. The manufacturer has to determine what's the value of those parts. Is it worth remanufacturing? So it starts right out where they're trying to, like you said, strip all of the contaminants, whether it's paint stripping, coatings removal, powder coating removal, removing the carbaceous smut or the black oxide that forms on some of these parts, get it all the way down to the base metal, if you will. So obviously we have a whole host of different types of chemistry, cleaners and conditioners that are going to remove those contaminants. And then they go through that, and once they go through and remanufacture everything, they then need to, like I said, preserve those parts for shelf life to be traveling all over the world. So in the remanufacturer's eyes, they're just trying what they call core restoration. So if we call it cleaning and trying to remove the oxides and contaminants, to them it's just get me the base metal, get me the raw part, and then I have something to start with. So it's a significant value for them to minimize the amount of work they have to do on the core. So, providing some services and cleaning and servicing in the front end, whether it be vibratory finishing or cleaning, removing the smut, is really what we do.
As we're talking here, you guys are from the beginning to the end. Like I said, the cleaners, the paint strippers, the other metal strippers, then into the conversion coatings, and then, the mass finishing, and then even getting into the rust preventers, those type of things. So you guys are pretty much involved in that from beginning to end in the whole remanufacturing process, correct?
What also takes us all the way through to the wastewater treatment, right? So you're still trying to remove metal and contaminants. So once that water is full of contamination, you have to have a way to clean the water.
It seems like this would be a tougher row to hoe than, say, a new manufactured part, right? That's pretty got very little contaminants on it, possibly, correct? And so with that, and I know that, like I said, a lot of the parts that the products you're talking about with the cleaners and strippers and stuff really take into consideration the wastewater process, because you just don't want to create a problem down the road. Be smart business, right? Create a problem, and then you guys are there to fix it. But you guys have really done a lot with some of these products that really seem to minimize those issues down the road when it gets to wastewater. So from beginning to end with that.
Many of the remanufacturers hadn't really considered that piece of it. So they would just build up all the wastewater into tanks and then have them all hauled off, until such time as you realize, can we get the oil out of the contaminant? Can we remove the heavy metals and all the things that are going to get trapped in their system, and then quantify the value of not having to send all your wastewater offsite. So I think for ours, it really has been a full circle for us of trying to add the value at every step of the way. And I think it's, many people aren't familiar with remanufacturing, but it's everywhere. It truly is everywhere. And I think, thankfully for us, we do have a way to restore those old parts and make them new again.
Yeah, you mentioned the brakes situation where I think that was one where they were putting it in plastic bags. I think I recall at one time, and it was causing some rust preventive vision. And any other, with a lot of these other products, especially that were involving with remanufacturing, any examples, like I said, with the cleaners and the rust preventers
There are a few instances in military applications where you can imagine they have a chemical resistant coating they put on much of the military hardware that's out in the field, and it's in extraordinarily harsh environments, if you will, right? So it's they have to get these tanks or these cannons or whatever back out of the field, and they don't just scrap them and get a new one. They take that tank and they put it into an enormous swimming pool, basically of cleaning chemistry, to strip everything off of that housing, so they can then figure out what do they have to add to it to make it new again. And same thing with munitions and things like that. These things are infinitely expensive to buy new, as we all know, with our whatever the impact is on taxes. And any way we can find ways to reuse stuff makes it that much more valuable and sustainable.
Yeah, I know you all have on your website a page, a lot of information about remanufacturing, the parts, the products that you all have that can go in that process. Pretty interesting things. And like I said, a lot of it talks about what the substrate could be, how much contamination's on there, how you're going to store these parts, right? They're not going to go right out and being used, but if you're going to store them, what are you going to do to prevent that? So it's a really informative page that people should really take a look at with that.
Well, that's what I think. We wouldn't have necessarily identified this market segment as something that was sizable until about 10 years ago. We really started to get into and recognized we had many companies, customers, that were doing just that. And they may not have been aware of the fact that that's what it is remanufacturing, whether it's overhaul or remade, all of those components that we had years and decades of success of restoring those things. And now it just became, it's a sizable infrastructure industry in the United States. And I think, we've been supporting that industry, and it's been very good to Hubbard-Hall as well.
Jeff, I was talking to a shop a few months ago, and one of the things he was telling me about, we were talking about some of the equipment. He was doing some upgrade, small refurbishing. And he said, his most effective piece of equipment is a pen and paper, where he can sit down and jot down really what he'd like to do. What are some costs? Figuring out what things are costing him and where he could either save money or save additional money by spending some money, because he knows that he'll get a return on investment with that. Is that what you see in a lot of the customers you're dealing with?
Excellent point. I think it's people always underestimate what they're going to need. And I think what we're seeing is, we've been trying for a number of years to try to promote the fact that you need to look at alternatives, right? But I think people if it's not broke, why fix it, right? But I think there's outside forces now that are demanding you look at alternative chemistry for whatever reason, whether it's solvents or you can't dispose of waste, whatever. But I look at it and think, when we go and talk to many customers, we provide maybe the eye-opening piece of bad news, if you will. Right, we're trying to give them the reality that here are your alternatives, none of which may be attractive because they hadn't budgeted for it. Like you said, number one, it's going to cost a lot of money, but it could in fact help you in the long term, because you're not going to use as much resources, or the machinery will last for decades. But I think the problem is, once we have broached that subject and put it on the line and told them the reality, they then go, and some customers will shut down because it's just too overwhelming. And then 3 years later, they want to go and revisit it. And like we said earlier, that just the time horizon, how long is it going to take for me to get the equipment in place? And how long is it going to be to modify my process? It becomes an overwhelming prospect. So I think you're right. Sitting down and trying to plan on pen and paper what your needs are today and what they're going to be in the future and I always recommend share that with your vendors, share that with them because they can help you kind of get to that point in time. You can make those investments.
Great. Well, like I said, the Hubbard-Hall website, hubbardhall.com, and there's a remanufacturing page that people can look and see what products they might want to get for their facility. But again, thanks for giving us some insight on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tim. Appreciate it.
The Scene in South podcast is brought to you by Hubbard-Hall. For more podcasts, visit hubbardhall.com or wherever you get your podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe, rate and review, and join us on social media. Produced by Awcast.